Ohio voters have rejected a Republican-backed measure, known as Issue 1, which would have made it more challenging to amend the state's constitution. The proposal sought to raise the threshold for passing future constitutional amendments from a simple majority to a 60% supermajority. Supporters of the measure argued that it would protect the state's constitution from outside interest groups. However, opponents, including the opposition campaign One Person One Vote, labeled it a deceptive power grab, intended to diminish the influence of the state's voters. The rejection of Issue 1 has been seen as a victory for democracy and a significant blow to Republicans in the state who favor imposing strict restrictions on abortion. Although the issue of abortion was not directly on the special election ballot, the result is considered a setback for Republicans, who had placed the question on the summer ballot in hopes of undermining a citizen initiative that voters will decide in November, seeking to enshrine abortion rights in the state. The defeat of Issue 1 maintains the simple majority standard for passing future constitutional amendments, a rule that has been in place since 1912. This outcome is likely to benefit Ohioans for reproductive rights, the group advancing November's abortion rights amendment, which aims to establish a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, with reasonable limits. Despite the defeat, Republican lawmakers who had pushed the measure suggested that they might try again in the future, attributing the failure to a lack of time to adequately explain the proposal's benefits to voters. The special election saw high levels of interest, with voters casting nearly 700,000 early in-person and mail ballots, more than double the number of advance votes in a typical primary election. The rejection of the proposal represents a rare rebuke for Ohio Republicans, who have held power across every branch of state government for 12 years. The result sets up a fall campaign that will serve as the latest national referendum on abortion rights since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned nationwide protections last year. Former President Donald Trump has pledged to prohibit the Department of Veterans Affairs from financing transgender surgeries if he regains power next year. Speaking at a school gymnasium in New Hampshire, Trump also promised to eradicate homelessness among veterans. Trump argued that taxpayer money should be used to care for veterans rather than funding what he referred to as radical gender experiments. He also proposed redirecting funds currently used for the shelter and transport of illegal immigrants to provide shelter and treatment for homeless American veterans. In addition, Trump criticized his potential Republican rivals, including Chris Christie and Ron DeSantis, and referred to President Joe Biden as a Manchurian candidate. The speech took place in front of an audience of about 700 people, marking Trump's fourth visit to the state during this election cycle. The event coincided with the release of an internal poll for Trump's campaign, which showed him leading the Republican field with 55% support, while DeSantis had dropped to 13%. The poll also indicated that 52% of Republicans were more likely to vote for Trump following his recent indictment related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Furthermore, 75% believed the charges were a distraction from alleged corruption within the Biden family. A report from the Los Angeles Times suggests that many black workers are preferring to continue working remotely to avoid microaggressions and racism in the workplace. The report comes as employees are gradually returning to the office following the easing of COVID-19 restrictions. Some black workers are reportedly hesitant to return due to their experiences of discrimination and questioning of their competence. The La Times quoted an anonymous paralegal who stated that working remotely allowed them to be more productive and focus better. Career experts also noted that remote work lets black employees avoid office politics and can help companies recruit a more diverse workforce. LinkedIn career expert Andrew McCaskill suggested that companies wanting to encourage a return to the office will need to reduce opportunities for microaggressions. He also emphasized the benefits of remote work for employees' mental health and authenticity. Meanwhile, President Biden is pushing for federal workers to return to the office in the fall, arguing that in-person work is critical for team well-being and delivering better results for the American people. Thomas Jefferson University President Mark Tykochinski has resigned following criticism from students and some staff members for liking tweets from various conservative figures. The university's CEO, Joseph G. Cacchione, announced in late July that Tykochinski would step down to concentrate on his research and clinical translation efforts, and would return to his role as a full-time professor. The move came less than 3 months after Tykochinski faced backlash for liking tweets by Donald Trump Jr. and journalist Alex Berenson, which were critical of Big Pharma, the COVID-19 vaccine, and some transgender medical procedures. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported on Tykochinski's Twitter activity shortly before the university reprimanded him. Following the story, Cacchione criticized Tykochinski in an email to the university community, stating that he should have known better given his position. Tykochinski, who has worked at the university for 16 years, subsequently apologized, expressing regret for his lack of understanding of how liking a tweet could be seen as an implied endorsement. However, a group of liberal students from the university's medical college wrote an open letter to the CEO and the school board of trustees, criticizing Tykochinski for his social media activity and suggesting that his actions indicated a broader issue concerning the institution's lack of diversity and inclusion. After Cacchione announced Tykochinski's resignation, the Inquirer reported that multiple students and faculty members were relieved and pleased with the decision. Thomas Jefferson University has not yet responded to queries regarding whether Tykochinski's social media activity influenced his resignation. The Bibby Stockholm, a 500-capacity vessel docked in Portland Port, Dorset, is currently housing 15 asylum seekers. Reviews of the conditions on the barge have been mixed, with some likening it to a prison and others praising the food and beds. The asylum seekers must scan everything they are taking with them in an airport-style security system each time they wish to leave the boat. They are then required to catch a bus to the port's exit, which runs hourly between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. 24/7 security is in place, including trained guards and CCTV, and there are around 60 staff on board. However, 20 others intended for the boat refused to board due to a severe fear of water, according to their lawyers. In an interview with Sky News, an unnamed Syrian asylum seeker voiced concerns that living on the barge would remind him of hiding from ISIS. He said being squeezed into a small space on the barge would remind him of the small room where he hid when ISIS were attacking his area. The asylum seeker had been living in a hotel in Bournemouth for 6 months before he was told at the end of July that he would be moved onto the barge. The use of the Bibby Stockholm to house asylum seekers has been criticized by campaign groups and charities. Over 40 organizations signed an open letter to Bibby Marine, the barge owner, calling the housing cruel and inhumane. Steve Valdez-Simmons, Amnesty International UK's Refugee and Migrant Rights Director, described the use of the barge as utterly shameful. The asylum seekers have been warned that they must board the barge or have their free accommodation withdrawn. Those who refuse will be given 24 hours to change their minds before the Home Office considers withdrawing their free, full board accommodation. In that event, they would be declared homeless and responsibility for their housing would pass to their local authority. Ghost guns, or homemade firearms, are becoming increasingly popular in the US, especially among those who do not want a record of their gun ownership. These guns can be made from kits purchased online, which include all the necessary parts to build a Glock 19, for example. The kits are not regulated like firearms because they come with unfinished lower receivers, the only part of the gun considered a firearm under U.S. law. Once the lower receiver is finished and the other parts are assembled, a working firearm is created. Unlike factory-made guns, these homemade guns do not have a serial number, making them untraceable. There is no record of sales for these gun kits in most states, which is part of the appeal for many buyers. However, it is impossible to know how many ghost guns exist or who owns them. In California, nearly a third of all firearms seized by law enforcement in 2019 were homemade and lacked serial numbers. According to Andy Lander, a firearms expert who worked for the National Rifle Association for 13 years, the kits are not the problem. He argues that criminals will find a way to obtain a gun regardless. Scott Thomason, a retired agent from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, believes that the lack of a serial number on these guns hinders law enforcement's ability to bring those who commit violent acts to justice. Jennifer Wexton, a representative from Virginia's 10th District, has co-sponsored 2 bills that would broaden the definition of firearms to include assembly kits. This would mean that these kits could not be purchased without the government's knowledge. Wexton believes that the interest in public safety outweighs the interest in not having a serial number on a firearm. While building a gun from a kit is not the easiest way to acquire a firearm, as it requires time and skill, it does provide an easy way for those who are underage, felons, or otherwise unable to legally purchase a gun to obtain one.